All right, welcome to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I am your host, Jordan Overturf, and today is the deadline to get your primary mail-in ballot application to your county elections official. If you are listening to this on Friday, February 21st, today is the deadline. If you're not going to vote by mail, then it doesn't really matter because your deadline for early voting is Friday, February 28th. That's right. Early voting is still continuing right now. We thank y'all for listening and getting engaged, finding out about these candidates before you head to the ballot box. I have had a really great time doing this podcast, and we look forward to talking to many more candidates down the road. We've got a great one today. A U.S. Senate candidate on the Republican side is looking to take over the mantle for Senator John Cornyn. We will get to that here in a second, but first, boy, that Democrat debate on Wednesday was something, wasn't it? Oh my gosh, I could not believe how many of the Democrats just seem completely unviable as candidates. I mean, they're finally ripping each other to shreds, which and they even talked about policy, like down to the nuts and bolts of some of this stuff. You got Mayor Pete challenging Bernie on his healthcare plan. Bernie calling Mayor Pete's plan a status quo update. Oh my gosh, Mini Mike, his first chance. I don't know. I would love to hear what you guys think about it. Go ahead, tweet at us on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. I guess you can't tweet at someone on Instagram. In any case, hit us up on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. Let us know what you think about the Democratic presidential candidates, even if it's just for the laugh. My guest today, though, is running for U.S. Senate. His name is Mark Yancey. He's a Texas businessman who is not afraid to talk about his inexperience in the political realm. He's been too busy running a business, raising a family, and living his life. But now he wants to take on incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican primary and an opportunity to take on a vast field of Democrat candidates right now. MJ Hager appears to be in the lead. If you watch that debate on Tuesday, we talk a little bit about that on the show. And so I had a great time talking to Mark. He certainly knows where he stands. He's got some great ideas on what he wants to do if sent to Washington. So I'm going to get out of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Mark Yancey. For those who don't know about you, give us just a quick rundown. What is your background? Why are you in this race?
Well, my name is Mark Yancey, and I am running for U.S. Senate opposing John Cornyn. I've spent 33 years in the private sector. I've never held public office. And the timing, I'm 62 years old. We have built 4 successful financial services businesses that have done extraordinarily well. One of them still exists. I stepped out of that right after Labor Day to launch my campaign, and we're being received very well in the state of Texas. We've logged a lot of miles on the ground and in the air, and so we feel very good about where we are as we're now in the primaries. Early voting started 2 days ago, and Super Tuesday's around the corner.
So are you feeling good about turnout in the reports you're hearing from the Republican ballot returns?
Well, I'm not hearing any reports about that. I was just reading in several papers this morning on my way to Austin, is I am hearing that the early voting is quite robust. So that's a positive sign. But mm-hmm. I haven't personally seen anything that says one way or another in terms of how people are voting.
Yeah, I was reading a report today that there are some concerns down in Harris County with some of the polling machines. Apparently there was a glitch or something, allowed folks to vote multiple times. So already we're starting to watch what's happening at the polls as we get ready for Super Tuesday.
I hope we can get through that. That's too bad.
So what was the core inspiration for you? Why get into this race for U.S. Senate?
Right. Well, I'm in the financial services sector. We are not directly affected by what goes on in Washington. We obviously, our firms were investing primarily in long-only equities. But what did affect our business was the Federal Reserve, which is not one of the three core branches of government. But we noticed back really starting in the George W. administration that there was, for lack of a better term, kind of undue pressure put on then the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And so the Federal Reserve is, it is the concept of balancing inflation relative to rates up and down the yield curve, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that did affect our business. And we saw there was noise. Now, we did get into where the capital markets completely froze up, and in late 2007 and 2008 was a complete shutdown of the capital markets.
Yeah.
And so that brought me even closer to really being more intellectually curious about our politicians and how they respond to their reaction, particularly as it relates to things that took place in the 2008 time frame. So I knew Kay Bailey Hutchison. I can't say that she was my neighbor or best friend, but I certainly had met her and had been on a couple of flights with her. As a nice lady. And when Senator Cornyn ran for office, she retired obviously, and stepped down. And then when Senator Cornyn was elected in 2001, took office in 2002, I started paying more attention to both senators, frankly. And Cornyn caught my eye because he was new.
Yeah.
And I also knew that he'd been in the state for a while as the Attorney General and some other.
Yeah, he was definitely new to national politics, but folks in Texas have known him for quite some time.
He was. And so as time went on, we started watching his behavior, and I think just like anyone who goes to Washington, I think they go up there with kind of a glare in their eye, and I can knock down walls and conquer the world, and though I've never had any conversation with Senator Cornyn about that. I believe, and I have no reason to doubt that he had good intentions when he went up to office in 2002. However, we've seen, and the Constitution calls for that in Article 1, Section 3. There's two senators for each state. We have seen the last 8 years, call it decade plus, where Senator Cornyn now is going on 18 plus years in Washington.
Yeah.
Where Senator Cornyn, in my opinion, has lost the concept of what his job is all about. And what I mean about that is that a sitting senator for any state, but and we're talking about Texas here, is to protect the interest of the state, period. Secondly, is to align legislation in Washington that is in the best interest of the 28 million plus people in the state of Texas. We've not seen that from him. In fact, you're familiar, you're obviously a very bright guy. You've seen and you're aware of the Liberty Score.
Yeah.
And you've seen, if you've not seen that, I can tell you that Senator Cornyn has a 67% voting record of voting for liberal Democratic causes, and that accounts for the time that he has been in office.
But are there any specific votes in that list that cause you consternation?
How much time do we have?
Well, we only got 30 minutes to chat, and I want to talk more about you and your policies, but yeah. I'll give you the chance to highlight some votes that you think are concerning and voters should know about.
I'll highlight just a couple, okay?
Yep.
And so, in August of 2019, I think in general, when you look at any spending bill that was proposed, whether this goes back pre-Trump to President Trump, Senator Cornyn was always on board with just rubber stamp it. Senator Cruz, although in the second year of his second term, would not do that, and as recent as of this summer, did not do that when Senator Cruz did. So in August of 2019, Senator Cornyn had agreed to suspend the debt ceiling, cancel the budget caps, and increase the spending of over $300 billion. Mm-hmm. Senator Cruz did not. In December of 2018, Senator Cornyn voted, amidst most of his peers did not, to release some extraordinarily dangerous criminals from federal detention facilities. This is a Democratic type thing. This is not something that a conservative Republican.
And do you have HR numbers for this for our listeners so they can go?
I don't. I'm getting this information is coming directly from Liberty Score. So your listeners, if they want to look at this, they can Google Liberty Score. Uh-huh. And he gets in fact, his grade on that is F. And any of your listeners can pull that up and look at it, and you can reference the comments that I'm making back to the HR bills.
Okay.
And I'll just mention two more because there's several of them on here. But again, anything related to spending, he's tied to a massive spending bill with debt ceiling raise for Democratic priority funding. That took place in 18, in early part of 18.
Okay.
So this is why you get how he gets to a 67% score. Let me just mention one other here.
But I want to be clear also. These votes took place before Democrats took over the House. Is that correct?
These were done in 19 and 18. So these were mostly in 19, and then going back to the early part of 18.
Okay.
Yep.
So for the ones, though, that have happened post-House takeover, can you attribute any of that to trying to create some sort or remove some of the gridlock that happens in Washington, D.C., and having some bipartisan discussions on these issues?
Well, I don't see it that way. I personally see Senator Cornyn, and I mean, look, he's been in a very senior position there. He was a minority whip.
Still is.
And Senator Cornyn is not the minority whip.
Oh, he's not.
No.
Okay.
But he was for a number of years, and he had held very senior positions. And listen, there's no doubt about it. When you're in the Senate as long as Senator Cornyn has been, you're a senior senator, right?
Yeah.
His legislation and the way that he has legislated is really been tied to kind of which way the wind blows. They've kind of used kind of a tongue-in-cheek, and a lot of that is, he's, in my opinion, he's extraordinarily close to Mitch McConnell in terms of influencing the way that the way that he votes. In part of that, if your listeners want to pull up that Liberty Score, you'll see that where he voted in there for an amnesty bill back in the Obama administration. Now, that could have some credence of what you said earlier in terms of trying to get to a bipartisan deal. But there was a ton of money for amnesty that he voted for. Our immigration laws are broke he's been there for almost 19 years.
Okay.
How many more decades do we have to talk about the southern border before something's done? It wasn't until President Trump on January 20th of 2017 took office that we have made enormous progress at the southern border. Mm-hmm. And so look, prior to that, he so subtract the 3.5 years. Call it 15 plus years that he was there. The southern border was absolutely a sieve of people and coming across the border. I could get into a number of things related to that: sex trafficking, drugs, all of those things. As a sitting senator, he has certainly been aware of. He's got more information on that than I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and certainly some credit has to be given to Governor Abbott for taking up the leadership and securing our border, making sure we're appropriating funding at the state level from that. I guess my question to you, as you look to going ahead and heading to Washington as a U.S. Senator, or the opportunity to, are you going to commit to Texans that the federal government will start picking up that bill and Texans can put $800 million a biennium toward other crucial needs?
Well, you remember, so let's go back to President Trump, all right? So the he campaigned with the idea that Mexico is going to build the wall.
Well, they're going to pay for it, at least.
No, excuse me, I'm sorry, I misspoke. They're going to pay for the wall is what I meant to say. And that didn't quite turn out that way.
Yeah, billions in defense spending is going to that effort now.
Exactly. So we saw that the budget was submitted by the president, we'll call it 10 days ago or so. Mm-hmm. And about $3.8 billion of that has been pulled from military, which will, by the way, military spending on a discretionary part of the budget now will be at the highest level we've seen in probably 50 years. We're going to spend roughly around $1 trillion on military spending. But look, I mean, he's having to rob from Peter to pay Paul to get the wall built.
But doesn't that? I don't know. I got to push back a little bit on that because national defense, protecting our southern border, seems like a worthy cause to put those tax dollars toward. I mean, at least it's part in the Constitution to provide for the common defense. A lot of Texans right now are either agree with or going to go out and vote on the primary ballot that we need a combination of wall and technical measures. So at least in terms of everything else we've seen, I mean, DOD was hit over the last few years with excessive spending on things like lobster tails and however much is spent on excess at the Pentagon. Yeah. And so while you can fault the president for not making Mexico pay for it, at least it seems like tax dollars are being appropriated to the appropriate measure.
Well, I fully agree with you, and I want to make it clear, I'm not faulting the president for Mexico not paying for it. I think when you're dealing with another sovereignty and trying to get them to listen, we're trying to get them to cooperate on a lot of things, and we finally got this trade deal done, right? And so we let's call that throw up a white flag and call it a victory. But look, we know it's no secret amongst anyone that pays attention in Texas is that Mexico is a very corrupt place, and all the way up to the presidency, and so we know now that President Trump, I believe, as we sit here today, I don't believe this is passed, but he's trying to get the drug cartels labeled as terrorists, whereby we can use military operations to blow up the mostly it's fentanyl and heroin that's coming out of Mexico. So there's a fine line there. I'm not a military expert, but so I don't want to mischaracterize that. But when the president is able to get the cartels labeled as terrorists, then we have the ability, without violating really the sovereignty of Mexico, is to blow up these meth labs and fentanyl labs, which, by the way, are extraordinarily dangerous. And a lot of this stuff. I was with a DEA agent in McAllen about 3 months ago, and he was telling me that 102 metric tons of heroin came across the border. I said, "Is this like just coming across the Rio Grande?" And he said, "No." He says, "It's coming across the bridges." Yep. And I just found that stunning. And that's just what he could tell me. And there's so much more to that than what because I'm an outsider, right? I'm not inside the Beltway, but the drug issue, the sex trafficking issue, it's a major problem. We're talking about young ladies that are being put in harm's way. I am so adamant about trying to find a way to fix that, and it's a horrible story.
Yeah, and Houston is listed among the top in terms of the cities with the worst human sex trafficking problems. So that's certainly something that I know Texans would like to see some progress on. And we know that Texans are strong on border security. But what are some of the other issues that you are taking to voters, especially right now as they're turning out to the polls?
Right. So if anyone wants to look at my information, they can go to voteformark.com, and all of my planks are on there. And what's important to me is, I'm pretty confident that we can get this done. It's going to take some work, right?
Yep.
So to me, it's term limits. I'm not a politician. I've never, for your audience, to be clear, I've never held a public office. But I know, and I've studied enough to know that politicians talk about term limits, and so even at the state level and also at the federal level.
Yep.
So I've also learned that it's much easier said than done. But there is a provision in the Constitution via Article 5 that you can get that done. So I think there's two things that are helpful in terms of thinking. That is, if you look at my website, that's the number one thing. I have pushed and pushed and pushed and advocated and communicated everywhere I've been in the state of Texas about term limits.
Yep.
I'm a non-politician. I really mean that. And it does, if nothing else, it will mitigate, if not completely get rid of corruption. And I think the longer that people stay in Congress, this is where all the kind of nefarious behavior comes into play. Our founders even said that the longer people stay in Congress, our freedom is at peril.
Yep.
And so, well, I don't need to name any names. Your listeners that would listen to something like this are very astute politically, and they know who the folks are that are there, that have been there, some of them for decades.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely silly. So, my planks are really term limits, and I think I've got a partner, should I make it through the primaries, and that Ted Cruz has now has been a very vocal advocate about term limits. I know he's spoken about it at least twice, and maybe more. I'm only aware of twice that he's spoken about that on the floor. And now he's not, as far as I know, he's never invoked the Article 5. I don't have any evidence that he's talked about that, but he's I believe he would be an ardent supporter of trying to get that done.
Yeah, and that's an issue that at least at the state level, Texans are going to get to vote on. I believe it's Prop 10 that calls for term limits here in the Texas legislature. And we certainly appreciate Senator Cruz taking up the mantle on term limits in D.C. Hopefully, he gets some more advocates on that level. Yeah. I like that you bring up the fact that you're a non-politician. It certainly seems like as we look at the broader field, all the way down to the congressional and the state level candidates, that there's a lot of non-politicians that are starting to get into the game. Why do you think so many people without any political experience are making these jumps into politics?
Well, my opinion is I think they're business people, right? So they've almost all of them have come from a business background where they've been successful. They have capital, most of them to support their own campaigns, and they've balanced a budget. They know what it is to live within. You take in so much, you spend so much.
Yep.
You stay within a budget where certainly I don't need to remind your listeners that we're almost $24 trillion in debt. Running just south of $1 trillion deficits. Corporations that would do something like that, they'd be at a bit, they'd be at bankruptcy. Right?
If you want a running total, follow Representative Chip Roy on Twitter. He'll give it to you about once a week. So
yeah, right. So I think it's I think it's since I'm running against Cornyn, let's talk about Cornyn. I mean, look, he's I'm sure in fact I met him. He is a nice man. I met his wife as well. They're very lovely people. But I think when you stay in office that long and you have little to show for it, that leads people from the outside that have had business experience and that have been fortunate enough to do well in business to say, hey, I'm tired of yelling at the TV. And it's time to kind of put my name in the hat and see if I can make a difference. And it's and to me, I look at it as shame on me if I don't do that. Because I really am very passionate about our country. I believe in American exceptionalism. I think we're one of the greatest countries of all time, and I want to promote that and promote it in perpetuity. And we also live in one of the greatest states, and I've traveled the country, I've traveled the world. I've truly have not, and there's not one. Maybe the Dakotas. I don't think I've been in South Dakota, but I don't think there's one state that I've not been in. And we live in a wonderful state. It's business friendly, it's tax friendly. People want to be here, and there's a reason why we have a lot of people moving into. That's why Austin is so busy right now, right?
Yeah.
It's it's growing. And Dallas is the same way. The Metroplex, which is where I live, I live in North Dallas, is growing by leaps and bounds. So,
well, I'm glad you talk about growth.
Yeah.
What can DC do to help Texas with this massive growth? And are you going to fight for a decrease in the tax dollars that are going to places like California, where citizens are leaving in droves, and the data shows that they're coming here, they're going to Florida, they're going to other business-friendly, low-tax states where they're escaping this stuff. But Texas is being crushed right now. Fortunately, we've got the census coming up, so we'll have a reapportionment of our representation with hopeful gains in Congress. But my question to you is, if you go to D.C., what are you going to do to help Texans better weather this growth?
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do is that there are roughly 400 bills stacked on top of Mitch McConnell's desk right now, and one of them happens to be an infrastructure bill. And I was reminded of that as I was riding from the airport to this office, and I was just here 3 weeks ago, and I go back and I was asking the driver. I said, how this area around the airport here in terms of all the construction, Texas is very, very good, and I've been here for 35 years. In terms of putting up freeways, it seems like they can just put them up overnight. You go to a place like California. And I'm not sure if your listeners or even yourself have been to the intersection of Wilshire and the 405. They've been working on that intersection for over a decade, and they still don't have it done. So Texas does a very good job. I have to say that I'm a bit surprised at what's taking place around the airport here in Austin, because I thought that they would, at least be through with that. So here's what I would do. Is I would get in a bipartisan way, I would get an infrastructure bill passed. We have 1,100 bridges in the state that are the integrity of those bridges is in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And so listen, Texas needs federal help to rebuild its infrastructure, continue to rebuild its infrastructure. A place like Austin, where it's growing, and for good reasons. Austin is listen. If I was a young person, I couldn't think of a better place to live than Austin, Texas. But
I don't know. I've lived in just about every corner that Texas has. My money would definitely go elsewhere, but you go where the work is.
Yeah.
You bring up the 400 bills that are on Mitch McConnell's desk, and you want to talk about Senator John Cornyn. Who else wants to talk about Senator John Cornyn? Are the 9 Democrats vying over on the other side of the aisle for their chance to take on Senator Cornyn?
Sure.
I watched the debate on Tuesday, and I've actually watched it a couple of times now, and not one of them mentioned Mark Yancey. They're all focused on John Cornyn, and for the most part, you look at they're mostly political novices. Several of them have run for office multiple times and lost, but the only ones up there that have any real experience are Royce West, state senator from the Dallas area. You've got the councilwoman from Houston.
Right.
You've got Chris Bell, who was a U.S. rep. But beyond that, it's, those 3 folks, and then 5 people all, putting their targets on MJ Hager right now. I guess as you sit there and you kind of see what the other side is gearing up and preparing for, what is your message to voters as you look down the barrel of November 2020?
Well, listen, if I was a Democrat and on the stage with them the other night, I would mention Mark Yancey as well. I would keep my attention focused on John Cornyn, and that's really who they're after. And I was in East Texas with most of them, not all of them. Royce West was there, and I can't remember. There's about 6 of them there. So we were in the Tyler area. We went to 5 different universities, and this goes back before Christmas.
Yeah.
And so I spent the day with them. Look, there's no messaging there. It's very analogous to what we saw last night with the presidential debates, and that is their message is beat Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, and so. That's not a platform. That's just a vindictive way of saying, hey, we think that Donald Trump is X, Y, and Z, and and we're up here standing on the stage beating each other up. And by the way, the further they go, the further I'm talking about the presidential Democrats now, the further they divide their party, and they have no message other than let's beat Donald Trump and everything's free.
Yeah.
And so, I would say at the state level, I don't know any of them really well. I've met most of them, probably Royce West more than any of them because he's been at most of these events.
Yeah.
Again, another, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way. I mean in a respectful way to Mr. West. I think he's, while I don't know him all that well, I'm sure he's a real gentleman. He's a guy that has been in politics way too long, and we need a fresh set of eyes. If I had to guess, I think they probably picked the right horse, and it looks like M.J. Hager would probably be the one that would win. That's just pure supposition on my part.
Is that who you would want to face in November?
I don't care who it is. I'm not paying. I'm focused on John Cornyn right now, and
okay.
We still have work to do before I have to worry about the Democrats. But I would say this, that they don't have a message. They really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that not only at the presidential level but at the Senate level, where they say that. All of them that were on the stage Tuesday night and on Wednesday night say that that healthcare as a right is absolutely wrong.
Yeah,
and so they're going to have to come up both at the Senate level and at the presidential level. They have to come up with a message other than I want to beat the president and everything's free. That's not a platform.
Well, as we wrap up here, here's your opportunity to speak directly to voters, many of whom have yet to go out to the polls yet. Early voting continues until February 28th, Super Tuesday on March 3rd. Yeah. What is your pitch to Texas voters?
Well, they should know about me is that I'm very passionate about this job. I want to work with Texans. I have three things that you have to narrow it down. On my website, there's a number of things on there, but term limits of it, as I've talked about, I will work tirelessly to get that done. It's extraordinarily important for no other reason to weed out corruption in Washington. The second thing is that I want to divest the power from the federal government. I want to whatever is unconstitutional that the government is involved, the federal government is involved in. I want to move it to the state level. A good example is that department is the Department of Education. There is no provision in the Constitution that allows for taxpayers to fund for something called the Department of Education. Now, if someone was to convince me, and I've been on this for 4+ months now, that the Department of Education produce some value, I'd be willing to change my mind. But it absolutely does not. It's a complete waste. And the numbers vary. It's somewhere between $80 billion to $100 billion in wasted taxpayer dollars. So I'll also remind your listeners that John Cornyn ran on the same platform. 19 years ago, he said that he would abolish the Department of Education for the same reasons that I'm talking about right now. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I'm a business person. I know how to get things done. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a bureaucracy. Washington is a big, broke place. And but look, I think the argument is someone, regarding the Department of Education, is going to have to explain to me why we spend $100 million, if we'll just use that number for sake of argument, why we're spending $100 billion of taxpayer dollars to fund something that's unconstitutional. They're going to have to explain that to their constituents, right? So I would finish up by saying that I have also the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, is the worst piece of legislation since I've been paying attention to politics. We've watered that down quite a bit. It needs to be completely terminated. Before that, though, the Republicans have to get their act together, and we have to find a solution in the private sector in terms of how to do that. Go across state lines, make it more competitive for insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield and Cigna, Humana, United Healthcare, and make it more of a competitive marketplace. Go back to the idea of underwriting pools of risk instead of gouging Texans with premiums that many of them cannot afford. There's no other thing, by the way. It's a misnomer that when the Democrats will tell you that there's 500,000 uninsured children in the state of Texas, and there's X number of people in Texas that are uninsured, that's a misnomer. Any county hospital, in any state, including Texas, cannot, by federal law, cannot turn away an individual health care. So it's not the ideal situation. That's not the way we want it, because that is an entitlement. That is a taxpayer-funded deal. Parkland Hospital, where I live up in Dallas, indigent care is somewhere around the 55% range. That's unacceptable. So we want to fix that. We need to do it with the private sector, though. So I am for market pricing. So meaning that I'm a capitalist. I want prices to be set by the market. But when you have pharmaceutical companies and the hospital groups that are gaming the system by consolidation, and as such, they're running up these enormous prices that you and I as taxpayers and the other folks in Texas are paying. I view that as gaming the system and gaming the taxpayers of the state of Texas. I intend to work very hard to change that. Look, let's start by calling in the CEOs of those companies and saying, hey, look, and this is recent news, right out of, in fact, Mr. Bloomberg's company, which he owns, announced this. Those four companies that I just mentioned earlier stacked up $48 billion in profit in 2019. They also got $70 billion in tax credits for those companies. I want to know why Texans that are paying for their private insurance are being gouged for premiums, and they're stacking up profits. Now, I'm a capitalist. I'm not, and I don't want to be setting prices. But look, when you take advantage of constituents in my state, I want to know what's going on. Where there's something broke. There's something broke, and we have to get to the bottom of it. I've never heard Senator Cornyn say a word about that.
Excellent. Well, voters will have a chance to go out there and let their voice be heard on March 3rd. If people want to learn more about you and your candidacy, what's your website, social media, all that stuff?
Yeah, it's voteformark.com is my website, and then I'm on Facebook. And I think it's Yancey for U.S. Senate, and there's that's been live for a long time. So there's a lot of posts and a lot of information on the Facebook page.
Excellent. Well, I know it's a busy time for you on the campaign. I appreciate you taking time to come to Austin and chat with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. Thank you again to Mark for joining us. Thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in, subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We do appreciate you. We appreciate everyone who, especially those who are going to get out and make sure they vote early. Again, the deadline for early voting is Friday, February 28th. Super Tuesday is on March 3rd, the day after Texas Independence Day, for anyone keeping track. I mean, this is the chance for Republicans to show exactly how strong we are. We need to turn out to the polls. We need to set that high water mark and let Democrats know that this state isn't going to be taken over. We're not going to let outside groups come in and pour billions of dollars into the state to take any of these seats, be it congressional, Senate, down to the Texas House, Texas Senate. It's real disturbing how much money is suddenly pouring into this state in an effort to take over the legislature and take over our seats in Washington, D.C. So make sure you're staying active. Make sure you're tuning into the podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the Big Texas Podcast, at Big Texas Podcast. Make sure you're following Texas Young Republicans and everything that we have got going on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs. And check out the website, texasyr.gop. Thank you again. I cannot say it enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having such a good time. Game day is almost here, and I will be thrilled to break down those results. But we got a few more candidates coming up next week. So make sure you're staying tuned, staying engaged, stay active. Till then, friends, we'll see you down the road.